You ever had someone point a fake gun in your face and think they could get away with it? That's exactly what happened to me. Two clowns, literally dressed like cops out of a Halloween clearance bin, stormed into my lane at the shooting range, flashing plastic badges like they were part of some federal task force. They screamed firearms violation, as if yelling loud enough would make their little charade real. Truth is, they weren't feds. They weren't even close. They were stooges sent by my neighborhood HOA president, her latest stunt in a long series of cheap intimidation tactics. The thing is, I wasn't rattled. I learned the best kind of revenge is patience. Let people bury themselves with their own foolishness. Saturday mornings at Pine Ridge Shooting Range were my sanctuary. Not just a hobby, not just a pastime, therapy. After everything I'd seen and survived in my federal career, holding a gun could have easily been a trigger. Instead, here, it became the exact opposite. The weight of my Remington 870, the scent of gun oil mixed with morning air, the sharp cracks of clay pigeons breaking in the sky. Those things grounded me. They made me steady. They reminded me I was still here. Most folks will never understand why a veteran finds peace at a range. But then again, most folks haven't carried what I carried. Every Saturday, same routine. Pull in at 7:30 sharp, slide into the same parking spot, sip from the same thermos of black coffee, open the same leather case that sat on my passenger seat. That case wasn't just for storage. It was a memorial. Inside, engraved on the nameplate, were the words, D. Ramos, 2008. My partner. My brother. My ghost. Every time I flipped it open, I whispered the same words. Morning, partner. Michael Thompson, the range owner, was already out setting up targets like always. Big guy, Iraq vet, the kind of man whose handshake alone could steady you. He'd become more than just the owner. He was a father figure, one of the few people who knew what it was like to walk around with invisible weight on your shoulders. Thomas, right on time, he'd say every week with a grin. And every week, he'd mention Danny, because he was the only one I trusted enough to share that piece of my life with. When I stepped up to lane 7 and started loading shells, my hands moved like they always had. Methodical. Automatic. Even after retirement, 20 years of federal training doesn't just fade. I still scanned the exits, read every face on the line, clocked every license plate in the lot. Old habits don't die. They hibernate. Michael noticed it too. Still checking corners, he said once with a knowing smile. I shrugged. Some things you don't turn off. Then came the shots, steady, deliberate like meditation. Every pull of the trigger wasn't about destruction. It was about control. About reclaiming something that trauma had tried to steal from me. I've been told by counselors to find healthy outlets. They probably never pictured me standing at a range, whispering to the ghost of my partner between rounds. But that's exactly what worked. About an hour in, peace gave way to something else. A figure walked toward me, a woman with a clipboard, striding like she was the queen of the range. Designer workout clothes, overpriced purse, but I noticed the details, the knockoff shoes, the stress lines around her eyes, the kind of cracks you can't cover with concealer. I'd spent years profiling people. She wasn't what she was pretending to be. Behind her trailed a younger man, maybe late 20s, dragging his feet like he wanted nothing more than to disappear. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, voice pitched with fake sweetness. "I'm Elizabeth Jones, president of the Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association. We need to discuss firearms documentation for the safety of our community." I set my gun down, calm but alert. She wasn't here for conversation. Her eyes kept flicking to my case like it personally offended her. The young man behind her mouthed something that looked a lot like, "Mom, please stop." I almost laughed. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "this is a private shooting range. HOAs don't control what happens off their property. Whatever protocols you're waving around don't apply here." She smiled that brittle smile people wear when they're bluffing. Then she unfolded a map, covered in red circles, and scribbled notes like a middle school science project. "According to our community safety assessment," she said, her tone sugary but strained, "firearms activity must be documented for liability insurance purposes." She spread the paper wide, like it was scripture. I didn't even need to study it long. Outdated boundaries. No stamps. No seals. Just a scare tactic dressed in red ink. But her eyes gave her away more than the fake survey, every glance darting back to Danny's case, lingering longer than she realized. "Ma'am," I replied slowly, my voice still polite, but carrying an edge, "you don't have the authority to regulate lawfully owned firearms on private property. You do well to check with a real lawyer before handing out fake citations." For the first time, her mask slipped. The smile faltered, her tone hardened. "We'll see about that, Mr. White. The safety of our community is my top responsibility, and I will take every measure necessary." And in that moment, I saw it clear as day. This wasn't about safety. This was about control, about intimidation. And if she thought two clowns with plastic badges and fake authority were going to scare me off, she had no idea who she was dealing with. The way she said background stopped me cold. It wasn't casual. It wasn't a slip. It was a trigger word loaded with intent. My stomach tightened as I realized just how much this woman might know. I've been meticulous about staying under the radar since moving to Sunny Meadows. No social events, no spotlight, nothing that might shine a light on my past. Yet here she was, standing in front of me with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, making it clear she'd already been digging. The younger guy, Ryan, I was almost sure now, shifted forward as if to step between us. "Mom, maybe we should," he started, but she cut him off with a sharp glance that could freeze water. "Ryan," she snapped, "we discussed this. Community safety comes first." The kid looked miserable. You could see it in the way his shoulders slumped and his eyes flickered down at the ground. He wasn't a bad kid. He was just caught in the crossfire of his mother's crusade. I felt a pang of sympathy for him. Loyalty to family on one side, the obvious wrongness of what she was doing on the other. As I turned to walk away, Elizabeth glanced back one last time. Her smile this time was colder, tighter, like a blade slipped under the skin. "Have a nice day, Mr. White. I'm sure we'll be speaking again very soon." She pulled a thick folder from her bag, the label on the front reading like a death sentence. "Thomas White, background investigation." My heart skipped. My throat went dry. She smiled as she walked off, leaving those words hanging like smoke. "We know exactly who you are." Tuesday morning rolled in quiet as ever, but the storm followed. A black SUV pulled into the Pine Ridge lot. Bold vinyl letters splashed across the side. Neighborhood Safety Unit. The logo was laughable. Cheap clip art shields paired with a corporate font that looked like it had been ripped from a pest control service. But it wasn't funny. Not anymore. Elizabeth stepped out wearing a tailored blazer stitched with the same logo, like she was playing dress-up in her own private militia. Ryan trailed behind her, arms weighed down with folders that looked heavier than his conscience. "Sir, this is an authorized safety audit," she announced, voice sharp and polished, like she'd been rehearsing it in the mirror. "All firearms activity must be reviewed under our new risk management program." She snapped her fingers, and Ryan handed over one of the binders, thick with charts and graphs. From a distance, it looked official, lots of colored bars, pie charts, and percentages. But when I flipped through it, I saw the truth. Irrelevant workplace accident stats pulled from a public website, whole paragraphs copied straight from Wikipedia, and random clippings taped together to look like a report. "This isn't an audit," I said, handing it back. "It's a collage of random documents. None of this has any legal authority." Her smile trembled at the edges, but didn't break. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Then perhaps you can explain," she said, "why your name appears in certain records tied to Nevada." Ryan's face paled. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, shooting me apologetic glances. The kid was practically begging me with his eyes to understand that this wasn't his idea. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back from the firearm," I said as she moved closer to my case. "You don't have authority to handle evidence." The word slipped out before I could catch it. "Evidence?" Elizabeth's eyes lit up like she'd just hit the jackpot. "Evidence? That's an interesting word choice, Mr. White. Almost like you have experience with law enforcement procedures." I exhaled slowly, trying to pull the conversation back. "Look, lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but impersonating a police officer is a federal crime. You might want to think about that before this goes any further." But she wasn't backing down. If anything, she leaned in harder. She placed that same thick folder from Saturday on the table between us like a loaded weapon. "Oh, I've done my research, Mr. White," she said softly, the edge in her tone sharp enough to cut glass. 20 years of federal service. Early retirement due to medical reasons. PTSD diagnosis following a traumatic incident. Her words hit me like a punch to the ribs. My hands trembled just slightly, the way they always did when Nevada came up, until my training kicked in. Deep breath. Steady voice. Maintain control. "Ma'am, medical records are protected under federal privacy laws," I said evenly. "If you've accessed them illegally, that's another crime to add to your growing list." Elizabeth's smile widened. She was enjoying this. "Public service records are accessible to concerned citizens," she replied, "especially when those citizens are responsible for community safety." Ryan finally found his voice. "Mom, he sounds like he knows what he's talking about." "Maybe we should—" "Ryan," she snapped, "I need you to support me here. This is about protecting our neighborhood." The kid's face crumpled with doubt. Family loyalty or moral conscience? He was being forced to pick a side. As they prepared to leave, Elizabeth leaned close enough that only I could hear her next words. "Tomorrow night's emergency HOA meeting will be very educational for everyone involved. The community deserves to know about their neighbors." When she walked away, she left the folder behind. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds when I picked it up. My instincts told me not to open it, that nothing good could come from looking inside. But curiosity is its own kind of gravity. I opened it. My blood ran cold. Inside were copies of my federal employment records, my medical discharge paperwork, and even old newspaper clippings from the Nevada incident. This wasn't amateur snooping. This was a full-scale background investigation, the kind that takes resources, contacts, and access the average person doesn't have. How does a suburban HOA president get her hands on sealed federal records? Michael walked over after they left, his brow furrowed, concern etched in every line of his face. "Thomas, you okay?" That woman seemed intense. "She knows about Danny and me," I said quietly. "She knows about Nevada." Michael didn't press for details. After 2 years of friendship, he understood some wounds stayed closed. But he also knew the look on my face when the old ghost came knocking. "You know what gets me?" I muttered, mostly to myself. "It's not that she's targeting me. It's how she's doing it. This isn't random harassment. This is calculated, systematic psychological warfare." I flipped through the folder again, seeing the patterns, the organization, the precision, the way she'd mapped out my triggers like she'd been trained to do it. "She's studied my weaknesses," I said, "and that scares me more than anything else." Michael nodded grimly. "Sounds like she's trying to break you down before she moves in for whatever kill shot she's planning." The more I thought about it, the more the questions piled up. Where did a recently divorced HOA president get the money for this kind of operation? Who gave her access to sealed federal records? And why me? I've been living quietly in Sunny Meadows for 2 years. No incidents, no problems. Why now? "This isn't just an HOA power trip," I told Michael. "This woman is hunting me for a specific reason." That night, I picked up the phone and called the only person I knew who could make sense of this. "Agent Clark? It's Thomas White. I need some advice about civilian harassment cases. I think someone's using my federal background to target me systematically." Tracy Clark had been my supervisor once. Back before Nevada, Tracy Clark had been my supervisor during my final years with the Bureau, the only person who knew the full, unvarnished story about Nevada and why my career had ended. If anyone could help me make sense of what was happening now, it was her. But before I even finished explaining the situation, her voice went quiet. "We found a real reason you moved there," she whispered. "Nevada, 2009. The shooting that ended your career." Her words were like a switch flipped inside me. My face went cold. All the memories I'd buried, all the ghosts I'd tried to silence, came rushing back like a flood breaking through a dam. By Wednesday morning, the harassment had reached a level I never imagined possible. When I opened my front door, the entire frame was plastered with official-looking citations: grass height violation, mailbox noncompliance, unauthorized recreational activities. Each one carried a $75 fine. Each one bore the seal of the Sunny Meadows Community Safety Board, an organization I was certain Elizabeth had conjured out of thin air. But it wasn't the bogus fines that froze me on the porch. It was the choreography of it all. As I stood there, scanning the papers, I noticed a steady stream of neighbors walking past my house. At least 6 in 10 minutes, each with a clipboard or phone in hand, snapping photos, scribbling notes. The so-called community safety patrol Elizabeth had formed looked less like neighborhood watch and more like a dystopian surveillance squad. Mrs. Patterson from next door, kind as always, paused on her third lap. She looked embarrassed, her voice low and apologetic as she explained, "Elizabeth told us you might be unstable. She said we all needed to keep an eye on you, for everyone's safety." It was surreal. I'd spent 2 years living quietly, trying to rebuild my life, and now my neighbors, people who had waved to me over garden fences, were documenting my every move like I was a zoo exhibit. And the worst part? They believed it. To them, a former federal agent with PTSD in their quiet suburb wasn't a neighbor. I was a potential threat. Watching Ryan participate in his mother's campaign was even harder. He looked like a prisoner doing community service, trailing behind Elizabeth with his head down, visibly uncomfortable. When she sent him to photograph my backyard memorial garden, the one place in the world I considered sacred, he hesitated. That garden wasn't just a few stones and flags. It was a promise, a sanctuary, a place where I could sit quietly with Danny's memory and talk to my partner about everything that had gone wrong. To my kitchen window, I heard Ryan's breaking point. His voice carried across the lawn, tight with frustration. "This is insane, Mom. You're stalking our neighbor. This isn't community safety. This is harassment." Elizabeth's response was swift and cutting. "Ryan, we don't know what kind of person he is. Former federal agents can be dangerous, especially those with PTSD." And then Ryan said something that changed everything. Like Dad was dangerous? His voice cracked. He was Army Special Forces, Mom. He had PTSD too. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush stone. The revelation hit me like a freight train. Army Special Forces. That meant this kid had grown up watching his father wrestle with the same demons I faced every day. He understood military trauma in a way few civilians ever could. "Your father was different," Elizabeth finally said, her voice softer but still defensive. "He was my husband. This man is a stranger who could hurt our family." But Ryan didn't back down. "Dad would be ashamed of what you're doing. He taught me to honor service, not exploit it." The pain in his voice was real, and for a brief moment, my anger at Elizabeth gave way to pity. She was broken too, just in a different way. But pity turned to rage that afternoon. I was in my kitchen when I heard voices in my backyard. That shouldn't have been possible. My property was fenced, locked. When I looked outside, my blood boiled. Elizabeth and 2 of her self-appointed neighbors on patrol were standing in my memorial garden, snapping photos of Danny's stones, reading the inscriptions on his commendation letters. They were holding my partner's purple heart, passing it between them like it was a clue in some crime drama. I stepped outside, every instinct screaming at me to physically remove them, but my training forcing me to stay composed. "Ma'am, you're trespassing on private property and handling personal memorial items without permission," I said. My voice was steady, but my fists clenched so hard my knuckles went white. Elizabeth looked up from the purple heart and smiled like she'd found buried treasure. "These military decorations are very impressive, Mr. White. Your partner must have been quite the hero before he died." The casual way she said "before he died" almost broke me. "Detective Danny Ramos was killed in the line of duty," I said, each word measured, deliberate. "He served his country and his community with honor. He deserves to be remembered with respect." But Elizabeth wasn't after respect. She was after ammunition. "It's interesting," she mused, tilting her head, "that you keep a shrine to a dead police officer in your backyard. Some might say that indicates an unhealthy obsession with violence and death." Her psychological manipulation was obvious, but that didn't make it less effective. Ryan stood off to the side, recording everything on his phone, but he looked like he was on the verge of tears. When Elizabeth picked up one of Danny's funeral photos, examining it like it was evidence, the kid finally snapped. "Mom, put that down. This isn't right." But Elizabeth was on a roll, convinced she'd found a smoking gun that would destroy me. A federal agent who keeps a memorial to violence, who visits shooting ranges, who refuses to cooperate with community safety measures. These are warning signs, she declared, already building her case. And that's when I saw the full scope of her plan. This wasn't random harassment. She was crafting a narrative, collecting photos, issuing violations, manipulating witnesses to isolate me from the community and paint me as a threat. It was calculated, methodical, and cruel. As they finally left my property, something happened that chilled me to my core. Elizabeth folded one of Danny's commendation letters and slipped it into her pocket. She was literally stealing pieces of my partner's memory to weaponize against me. Later, I learned that Ryan's father had died 2 years earlier from cancer tied to burn pit exposure during his tours in Iraq. The timeline clicked into place. Elizabeth's husband dies. She's left grieving, struggling financially, drowning in resentment. And now she needed a villain, someone to blame, someone to destroy. That night, I called Agent Clark again. I think this woman might be targeting veterans specifically, I told her. The private investigator bills, the sophisticated background research, the coordinated community pressure. This feels like more than just HOA drama. Tracy's response was immediate. Agent Clark's voice stayed calm, but I could hear the edge beneath it. Thomas, this is bigger than one neighborhood. We've been seeing patterns like this in other communities. Stay alert. Document everything. Call me if things escalate. Her words hung in my ear long after the line went dead. That night, I opened my front door to find a manila envelope taped at eye level. Across it, in block letters, urgent, final warning. Inside were printed photos of Danny's grave. Underneath, a note written in sharp, deliberate strokes. Even the dead aren't safe from scrutiny. I sat down hard, the paper trembling in my hands. There are moments in life when someone crosses a line so sacred you can't believe another human being could go there. This was one of them. Wednesday evening brought the emergency HOA meeting Elizabeth had been threatening for weeks. The community center parking lot was full before sunset. I arrived early, wanting to control at least something about what was happening. Instead, I stumbled onto the moment that explained everything. Elizabeth and Ryan were arguing by her car, their voices rising just enough that I could hear every word through my cracked window. Mom, is this really about community safety? Or is this about the money? Ryan demanded, waving a sheaf of papers like a weapon. I couldn't make out the details from where I sat, but his next words painted the picture for me. Bankruptcy notices, foreclosure warnings, credit card bills. Mom, you're broke. The HOA presidency is the only income you have left after the divorce. Elizabeth's head snapped up, her response sharp and defensive. I built this community. This position keeps us afloat. That veteran threatens everything we have left. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. Suddenly, the clues clicked into place. Her expensive handbag paired with discount store shoes. The stress lines etched deeper every week. Her frantic defense of her position. This wasn't about community safety or HOA politics. This was about survival. You don't understand, Elizabeth went on, her tone rising. If people start questioning my authority, if they start thinking I can't handle community threats, they'll vote me out next election. Then what? We lose the house. We lose everything. Ryan's response broke my heart. Dad would want us to handle this with honor. Mom, he'd want us to find honest solutions, not destroy innocent people. But Elizabeth wasn't interested in honor anymore. She was clinging to the one lifeline she had left. And I had become the threat she needed to neutralize. Then came the detail that made my stomach twist. Mom, Ryan said, his voice low but disgusted. $3,000. You took $3,000 from community funds to hire a private investigator to dig up dirt on one neighbor who's never caused any trouble. So that was how she got my sealed records. She'd been using HOA funds, disguised as security consultations, to bankroll her personal vendetta. As they walked toward the building, Elizabeth's last words froze me in place. If I can prove Thomas White is a threat to this community, Everyone will see that I'm the only thing standing between them and danger. They'll re-elect me in a landslide, and our problems will be solved. The calculated nature of her plan took my breath away. This wasn't some petty harassment campaign. This was political theater, and I was the villain she needed to save the town from. Inside, the community center was packed beyond capacity. People I'd never seen before filled every seat and lined the walls. Elizabeth had clearly been working the phones. This wasn't just the usual HOA crowd. This was a trial by public opinion. Phones were out. People were taking notes. The air hummed with anticipation, the way a courtroom buzzes before a verdict. Elizabeth took the podium with the confidence of a prosecutor delivering an opening statement. Her slideshow was titled Community Safety Crisis. The first slide made my stomach drop. An aerial photo of my house with red circles drawn around it and the words potential security concern in bold letters. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice crisp and authoritative, we have a situation that requires immediate attention and decisive action. What followed was a masterclass in weaponized narrative. She presented my federal service record as evidence of potential danger instead of public service. She showed photos of my memorial garden and described it as a shrine to violence and death. She played out-of-context recordings of my conversations at the shooting range, turning therapeutic visits into something sinister. Every fact about my life was twisted into proof that I posed a threat to suburban families and children. 20 years of federal weapons training became a warning sign. A medical retirement for psychological reasons became evidence of instability. Regular visits to a shooting range became preparation for violence. My refusal to comply with her community safety protocols became defiance of authority. She didn't just smear me. She built a profile, a caricature of a ticking time bomb living quietly next door. The murmurs started immediately, rippling through the room like wind across tall grass. Neighbors who had never said more than hello to me were now whispering to each other, as if I were a case file on a criminal show. And then, unexpectedly, someone stood up. Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor who'd been part of the morning patrol, raised her hand. Her voice trembled, but carried across the room. Elizabeth, I've lived next to Mr. White for 2 years. He's never caused any problems. He keeps his property neat. He's polite when we talk, and he helps me carry my groceries when I'm struggling. Are we really going to destroy a man's reputation based on speculation and fear? The room went silent. Elizabeth's perfect narrative flickered, and that's when the door opened and Michael Thompson walked in, still in his range clothes. Carrying himself with the unmistakable bearing of a combat veteran, he scanned the room like he was entering a contested zone. Excuse me, he said, his voice cutting clean through the tension. I couldn't help overhearing some concerning statements about one of my customers. Thomas White has been coming to my range every Saturday for 2 years. He's quiet, respectful, safe with firearms. He's never caused a single problem. Michael's words cut through the room like a blade. If you want to talk about threats to community safety, maybe you should discuss the woman who's been stalking a veteran and siphoning community funds to harass him. The effect was immediate. Elizabeth's face turned crimson, her polished composure cracking under the weight of public exposure. Mr. Thompson, she snapped, you don't understand the full scope of this situation. I have evidence that Mr. White poses a genuine threat to our families and children. But Michael stood his ground, his combat-seasoned voice calm, yet razor-sharp. Ma'am, I've been around dangerous men. I fought in Iraq. I know what real threats look like. The only dangerous person I see in this room is the one abusing her position to destroy an innocent man's life. The crowd shifted, a visible split forming down the middle of the community center. Some neighbors clung to Elizabeth's fear-driven narrative, while others looked at her with doubt, questioning her motives for the first time. The room swelled with voices, arguments overlapping, whispers spreading like wildfire. Sensing her carefully crafted performance slipping, Elizabeth made one last desperate move. She slammed her palm against the podium and shouted over the chaos. Fine. If this community won't protect itself through proper channels, I'll bring in real federal authority. Tomorrow morning, you'll discover what real federal authority looks like." Gasps rippled through the room. Mrs. Patterson leaned toward me, her whisper loud enough to carry. "Thomas, I think she's lost her mind." She had no idea how right she was. The next morning, the pounding on my front door jolted me awake. A commanding voice followed, sharp enough to raise my pulse. "Federal agents, open up immediately." For a moment, my heart seized. Had Clark escalated my case overnight? Was this real? But when I looked through the peephole, reality hit me like a slap. Elizabeth stood on my porch wearing an FBI windbreaker so flimsy it might as well have come from a Halloween shop. Flanking her were Ryan and another neighbor, both kitted out in matching bargain bin tactical gear. "Thomas White," Elizabeth declared, puffing out her chest, "you are under investigation for possession of stolen federal evidence and violation of community safety statutes. We need to inspect all weapons and related materials immediately." She flourished a piece of paper that looked like a warrant. From a distance, it had the right seals and legal jargon, but I'd seen enough real warrants in 20 years of federal service to spot a forgery in seconds. I took the document and studied it, loud enough for the gathering neighbors to hear every word. "This is fascinating. Federal warrants don't use this formatting. The court seal is photocopied instead of embossed. The judge's name is listed as Federal Judge Smith. There's no such title in the judiciary. And this barcode? I held it up for everyone to see. That's from a FedEx shipping label. The crowd chuckled nervously. Elizabeth's bravado faltered, but she doubled down. "Are you refusing to comply with federal authority?" she demanded, her voice trembling beneath the act. "Ma'am," I replied evenly, "I'm refusing to comply with fake authority. Impersonating a federal officer carries a minimum of 20 years. You might want to check your sentencing guidelines before continuing the charade." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Ryan's face flushed with shame, his body language screaming that he wanted to vanish. The poor kid was drowning in humiliation, trapped between loyalty to his mother and the undeniable truth unfolding before his eyes. Neighbors began pulling out phones, some filming, others dialing numbers, likely to call the real police. Elizabeth's grand production was crumbling in real time, yet she clung to her role with a fanatic's determination. "Mr. White," she pressed, pointing a trembling hand toward my yard, "we have evidence you're in possession of federal property that should have been surrendered upon your dismissal from service. Specifically, the weapon you keep in your memorial garden." The way she said memorial garden made my blood boil. She twisted sacred ground into a crime scene with one careless phrase. That was the breaking point. Without a word, I walked to my car, retrieved Danny's gun case, and set it down on the porch where every neighbor could see. My voice rang clear across the stunned crowd. This weapon belonged to Detective Danny Ramos, my partner for 8 years with the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. He was killed in the line of duty on March 15th, 2008, during a raid on a weapons trafficking operation in Las Vegas. The last thing he said to me was, "Take care of my gun, partner." The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. No whispers, no phones, just the heavy weight of truth sinking into the bones of everyone present. I saw tears forming in neighbors' eyes as the reality of Danny's sacrifice swept away the fog of Elizabeth's lies. I lifted the Remington from the case, holding it with reverence. This shotgun was Danny's personal weapon, passed down from his father, who served in Iraq. Before he died, he made me promise to keep it safe, to honor what it represented. My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. Danny Ramos wasn't just my partner. He was my brother, the finest law enforcement officer I ever knew. The crowd leaned in as I continued, pulling them into the story Elizabeth never wanted told. The night Danny died, we executed a raid on a warehouse in Las Vegas. Intelligence said 3 suspects. Minimal resistance. A routine takedown. But intelligence was wrong. There were 8 suspects, all armed with military-grade weapons, and they were waiting for us. I paused, the memories clawing their way back. My hand shook, but I steadied them against the case. Danny was first through the door. Always first. He believed in leading from the front. When the shooting started, he shoved me behind cover and held his ground alone. For 10 minutes, he held off 8 armed men so the rest of us could reposition. He never backed down, never retreated. The crowd was transfixed. Even Elizabeth's cheap windbreaker and plastic badge seemed to shrink against the enormity of real sacrifice. A rifle round tore through his chest, just below his vest. I reached him in time to hear his last words. He wasn't worried about himself. He wasn't even worried about dying. He was worried about the mission, about protecting his team. I held up the Remington again, my voice unshakable now. This isn't evidence. This is legacy. This is the memory of a man who gave everything so others could live. The community stood in stunned silence. For the first time, Elizabeth had no words. Service, sacrifice, and the courage to stand between innocent people and those who would cause harm. By now, several neighbors were openly crying, and even Elizabeth looked shaken by the raw weight of my words. For the past 2 years, this shotgun has been my therapy, I continued, locking eyes with her. Every Saturday, I bring it to the range. Not because I crave violence, but because handling Danny's weapon helps me carry my survival guilt and honor his memory. It's never been a secret, but now you all understand. My weekly routine is about healing, not preparing for war. Ryan stepped forward, tears streaming. Mom, stop this. Please. Dad would be ashamed of what you're doing. His collapse seemed to jolt Elizabeth, if only briefly. She glanced around and saw what everyone else now saw. Her costume wasn't authority, it was mockery. Next to Danny's sacrifice, it was more than absurd, it was offensive. Then my phone rang. Agent Clark's voice carried across the porch speaker. Agent White, we're en route. 15 minutes out. Is the subject attempting to seize memorial property under false federal authority? When the black SUV pulled up, the difference was night and day. Government plates. Tinted windows. The kind of presence you can't fake. Agent Tracy Clark stepped out, calm, professional, unmistakably real. Her badge gleamed, not plastic. Her authority needed no explanation. Thomas, she said warmly, as though we'd last seen each other yesterday. Retirement treating you all right? She gave me a nod of recognition, then scanned the scene. Neighbors, Elizabeth's costume, the bogus warrant on my porch. I take it this is our subject? She asked. Elizabeth tried one last desperate bluff. Agent Clark, I demand to speak to your supervisor about this harassment of concerned citizens conducting legitimate safety operations. Agent Clark didn't blink. Ma'am, impersonating a federal officer is a felony. That costume, that badge, that fake warrant, you've committed multiple crimes. Hand over your identification. When Elizabeth hesitated, Ryan quietly stepped forward. Agent Clark, I have recordings. Everything my mother's done, the harassment, misuse of HOA funds, targeting Mr. White for being a veteran. All of it. Clark reviewed the phone, her voice turning official. These recordings confirm civil rights violations, fraud, impersonation, and conspiracy to deprive a citizen of constitutional protections. Elizabeth Jones, you're under arrest. Real cuffs clicked shut. Elizabeth's shrieking defense only dug the hole deeper. I was protecting this community. Veterans with PTSD are dangerous. He could have snapped at any moment. Clark's expression hardened. Ma'am, systematic harassment of disabled veterans is a federal civil rights violation. Your actions aren't protection. They're discrimination, and they will be prosecuted accordingly. As Elizabeth was loaded into the vehicle, Mrs. Patterson approached me in tears. Thomas, we're so sorry. She fooled us. She made us fear a man who was never a danger. Others followed, apologizing for their part in the hysteria. The community's healing had begun, but my own sense of safety would take longer to rebuild. That's when Agent Clark pulled me aside. Her next words changed everything. Thomas, Elizabeth Jones isn't just a neighborhood problem. We've seen this pattern before. 3 other communities, same methods, same targets. Someone is deliberately identifying vulnerable veterans and retired agents, then orchestrating harassment campaigns against them. She opened a federal case file. The methods were identical, Private investigators digging into sealed records. Local HOA leaders fronting the attacks. Neighbors pressured into harassment, all designed to isolate veterans or force them out entirely. What I thought was a personal vendetta wasn't personal at all. It was organized crime. The attack was too organized, too resourced, to have been Elizabeth's idea alone. Ryan's mention of private investigator bills, the depth of background research, and the coordinated pressure campaign all pointed to something larger. You think she had help? I asked, though the answer was already clear. Agent Clark nodded. The PI firm she hired has ties to similar cases in Phoenix, Denver, and Sacramento. Same methods, same targets, same endgame. Cut veterans off from their communities. The thought chilled me. How many others have been driven out of neighborhoods? How many have been isolated, or worse? We need to talk to Ryan, Clark said. If he knows who funded this or coached her, it could break open the network. Ryan didn't hesitate. My mom was getting coaching calls, step-by-step instructions. How to pull sealed records. How to exploit PTSD. How to phrase legal-sounding arguments. Everything. He pulled up phone logs showing late-night calls to out-of-state numbers and wire transfers totaling $5,000. Always after she reported progress, he admitted, shame in his voice. Clark pulled me aside. Elizabeth isn't a rogue neighbor. She's part of something bigger. Ever seen a bully realize they picked the wrong fight? That's what's about to happen here. Friday morning, the community center filled again, this time at Agent Clark's request. Her briefing revealed the full extent of what we were dealing with. Elizabeth Jones wasn't just harassing Mr. White. Clark began, her voice carrying like a prosecutor reading an indictment. She systematically targeted every veteran in Sunny Meadows. The evidence was staggering. Files on 4 other veterans, service records, medical histories, family details, all cataloged and flagged for exploitation. Mr. Stone, Iraq veteran, Maple Street, Clark read. Targeted for displaying his Purple Heart. Deemed triggering for children. Mr. Stone stood shakily. She came to my door 3 times, demanding I take it down. Said it glorified violence. His hands trembled as neighbors placed steadying arms around him. Mrs. Smith's husband, Clark continued, 3 tours in Afghanistan. Repeated animal control complaints filed against his PTSD service dog. Mrs. Smith rose, fury in her voice. 6 times she tried to strip away the only therapy that keeps my husband stable. It was cruelty with surgical precision, targeting therapy animals, metals, even social networks. Elizabeth had maintained spreadsheets tracking veteran schedules, interactions, and support systems. This was a nosy gossip. It was surveillance designed to isolate. The second half of the briefing exposed the network behind her. Ryan, pale but resolute, took the podium. 2 months after Dad died, Mom got a call. Someone claiming to be a community safety consultant. They taught her exactly how to push veterans out, how to exploit trauma, how to stir fear. She was paid $5,000 for following protocol and promised more for each veteran she drove away. The recordings he played made the room fall silent. Elizabeth's voice receiving cold, clinical instructions, exploit PTSD triggers, frame therapy dogs as dangers, turn service records into threats. It was psychological warfare disguised as community safety. Agent Clark returned to the podium. With Ryan's evidence, we've identified 12 more communities under attack across 6 states. This is a coordinated campaign to isolate veterans, dismantle their support networks, and, ultimately, increase suicide rates among those most at risk. The weight of it landed like a hammer. This wasn't neighborhood bullying. This was a conspiracy against veterans nationwide. Elizabeth now faced the full weight of federal law. Civil rights violations, conspiracy, wire fraud, identity theft, impersonating a federal officer, and participation in a criminal enterprise targeting a protected class. 30 years in prison minimum. The room was stunned, then galvanized. Mrs. Patterson spoke first. We need new HOA leadership. Leadership that protects veterans, not persecutes them. Neighbors nodded, murmuring in agreement. The healing had begun. But now we knew. Sunny Meadows wasn't the only battlefield. The air in the community hall was thick with a mix of relief and unease. Mrs. Patterson's words cut through the murmurs like a promise of a new beginning. We need policies that prohibit discrimination based on service records or medical status, she said firmly. Heads nodded all around her, the neighbors finally realizing that silence had allowed cruelty to fester in their own backyard. For the first time in weeks, the conversation turned toward healing. It was productive, even hopeful, but a shadow lingered. Everyone in the room knew Sunny Meadows was just one battlefield in a much larger war. That hope shattered when Elizabeth Jones, handcuffed and flanked by federal agents, was marched out of the building. Her face was pale, but her voice was sharp with desperation. "You don't understand," she cried, twisting against the officer's grip. "There are others. They'll come for you next." Her words hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one had seen yet. The crowd fell silent, fear curling in their stomachs. Then, as if on cue, Agent Clark's radio crackled with urgency. "All units, we have confirmed reports of similar harassment incidents in Phoenix and Denver. Request immediate federal response to both locations." The entire room froze. Elizabeth hadn't been lying. The conspiracy was alive, spreading beyond state lines like a disease. 3 months later, the weight of justice descended in a federal courthouse packed with veterans, families, and reporters. Elizabeth Jones stood before Judge Harold Martine, a man who carried his own scars from Iraq and had little patience for excuses. The evidence laid out by prosecutors was staggering. Elizabeth's network wasn't just Sunny Meadows. It had stretched into 15 communities across 8 states, targeting more than 60 veterans in calculated campaigns of harassment, isolation, and psychological warfare. When the time came for sentencing, Judge Martine didn't hold back. His voice, weathered by decades on the bench, carried the weight of righteous fury. "Ms. Jones, your systematic targeting of disabled veterans constitutes some of the most reprehensible criminal behavior this court has ever encountered. You exploited the service and sacrifice of American heroes for personal financial gain. You inflicted immeasurable harm on men and women who had already given everything for their country. This court will ensure such betrayal does not go unanswered." The courtroom was silent. Veterans in uniform sat shoulder to shoulder with their families, many gripping hands, others wiping away tears. The sense of vindication was powerful, but so was the grief for what had been endured. Elizabeth's sentence was severe and final. 2 years in federal prison for civil rights violations. 3 additional years for conspiracy and wire fraud. Lifetime prohibition from holding any community leadership position. Full restitution, including stolen community funds, therapy costs for veterans she had harassed, and every payment she'd taken from the criminal network. "This sentence will send a message," Judge Martine concluded. "Anyone who targets veterans will face the full weight of federal prosecution." Yet the trial wasn't only about punishment. It was about truth. And the most powerful truth came from Ryan Jones, Elizabeth's own son. Taking the stand, his voice unsteady, but his resolve unshakable, Ryan told the court, "My father served 3 tours in Iraq defending this country. My mother dishonored his memory by attacking the very people he fought alongside. Justice for these veterans is justice for my father's legacy." His testimony not only secured Elizabeth's conviction, it helped convict 12 other conspirators operating across state lines. His courage had ripped the mask off a network that preyed on the vulnerable, saving countless others from similar abuse. The fallout in Sunny Meadows was immediate. Within days of the sentencing, the community voted unanimously to adopt sweeping reforms. New HOA policies explicitly prohibiting discrimination based on military service or medical status. Zero tolerance for harassment, with immediate removal for violators. Creation of a veteran support committee, ensuring that military families were not only protected but celebrated. To everyone's surprise, Ryan was elected interim HOA president, unanimously and at the youngest age in community history. His first act was deeply symbolic. establishing a memorial fund for all veterans targeted by his mother's cruelty. "We can't undo the damage that was done," Ryan said during his acceptance speech, "but we can make sure it never happens again. From this day forward, this will be a community where veterans are honored, not harassed." Elizabeth's case became the cornerstone of what federal prosecutors called the Veterans Harassment Conspiracy. 47 individuals across the country were indicted. Training manuals were seized. Bank accounts were frozen. Networks that had spread like underground weeds were pulled up by the roots. Agent Clark estimated that over 300 veterans nationwide had been targeted before the conspiracy was exposed. "Thomas's courage saved hundreds," she told the press. 6 months later, I stood in the backyard of my own home. What had once been my private memorial garden for Danny had transformed into something far greater. Volunteers were placing the final touches on a permanent community memorial. A bronze plaque gleamed in the center, engraved with Danny's name alongside 12 other service members connected to Sunny Meadows. Around it bloomed gardens designed by neighbors, living testaments of gratitude and remembrance. My sanctuary had become a gathering place where veterans and families came not to suffer in silence, but to remember together. The transformation rippled outward. Mrs. Patterson began hosting weekly coffee gatherings for veteran families, building a lifeline of support that stretched from VA paperwork to job searches. Mr. Stone became the community historian, documenting service records and preserving stories that would outlive us all. What Elizabeth had tried to fracture was now more united than ever. For me, retirement took an unexpected turn. Agent Clark invited me to consult with the FBI's Veteran Protection Task Force, where my experience could help dismantle harassment networks before they caused lasting harm. The work was meaningful, healing, even. "You become the poster child for fighting back," Clark told me once. But I didn't see it as a title. To me, it was a responsibility. The national impact was undeniable. Congressional hearings on veteran harassment led to new federal laws protecting military families in housing and communities. Ryan testified before Congress, transforming from a reluctant witness to a national advocate for veteran rights. Michael Thompson expanded Pine Ridge Range to host therapy programs for veterans with PTSD, setting a model that spread across the country. Danny's name lived on, not only in bronze, but in every life touched by the protections we fought to create. Perhaps the most profound change was internal. For years, survivor's guilt had weighed on me like an anchor. But standing in that memorial garden, surrounded by veterans sharing stories of their fallen brothers and sisters, I realized something. Elizabeth's cruelty, designed to isolate us, had instead forged a community stronger than I could have imagined. Sometimes the greatest way to honor the fallen is not only to remember them, but to protect the living. That is what Sunny Meadows had learned to do. Justice, I understood now, is not just about punishment. It is about protection, healing, and ensuring that those who have already sacrificed for their country are never again left to stand alone.